In 2006, Alitalia Airlines, the official airlines of Italy, made a slight mistake on its webpage regarding the international airfare from Toronto, Canada, to the island of Cyprus, Greece. They advertised the business class seats for $39. $39 a seat, international flight. Only problem was somebody left out the 2 zeros. It was supposed to be $3,900. But guess what? 2,000 tickets were immediately snatched up at $39 apiece. It cost the airline $7.7 million. Somebody messed up. In 1990, 75 million phone calls across the United States went unanswered after a single switch at one of AT&T's switching stations suffered a minor mechanical problem. Shut down the system. And it had a ripple effect, a dominoes effect, infecting so many other businesses and organizations. The cause was a simple data entry mistake. American Airlines alone estimated they lost 200,000 reservations in that one day. Somebody messed up. In 1961, Decca Records sent 2 executives to London evaluating new musical talent. They were there to check out a local rock and roll band. Those 2 executives spent 2 hours listening to this group performing some 15 songs there at the Decca Studios. The band waited for several weeks to hear back as to whether or not Decca Records were going to sign a contract with this group. Finally, the manager was told, "We don't like these boys. That kind of group, there's not a need anymore. A 4-piece band with guitars, those days are over. They're finished." The group, I can tell by the expression on most of your faces, you know who it was. The Beatles, the most popular band of all time. And guess what? Decca Records lost hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. Why? Somebody messed up. Well, there's 2 things I've learned about messing up. First of all, we've all messed up. Can I see the show of hands of anybody that's never messed up? Okay? I'm taking my hand down, okay? That's certainly not true. We've all made bad choices. We've all made poor decisions. There's been times in our lives when we've went down the wrong path. And it's cost us. It's cost us a lot. It can cost us marriages. It can cost us jobs. It can cost us friendships. It can even cost us peace of mind. And the second thing I've learned about messing up, all of us, one way or another, are a little messed up. We're all a little messed up. See, we were all born spiritually messed up because of that sin factor. People are stressed out all over the place, at work, at home, in this entire world. They're strung out. They're strung out with guilt because they messed up. Now, the good news is, just because you've messed up doesn't mean that you have to stay messed up. You don't have to. Jesus specializes in dealing with messed up people. Think about it. Look at his word. We see where he specializes in mixed up people. I didn't really know that I was going this route until sometime this week. And I don't even know what to call it yet. But I'm working on a series of sermons, and this being the first one. And I'm going to have some interruptions with Mother's Day, Memorial Day, graduation. And by the way, I need a list of all the graduating seniors. I need pictures for our video, okay? So I'll interrupt myself to mention that. But you'll see where there's a common denominator here with this series of sermons I think all of us can relate to in one way or another. One of the things that I appreciate most about the life and the ministry of Jesus is how he just had a way of gravitating to certain people. There was that magnetic pull to those who were ignored, those that were ridiculed, those that were ostracized, those that were rejected, those that were hated. Today, we're going to look at what I think is the most fascinating conversation that Jesus ever had with a woman. Now, the Apostle John, in his gospel, dedicates 42 verses to this story. It's the longest conversation ever recorded in God's word between Jesus and any other individual. The woman at the well. You're familiar with that story. Most of you remember it from childhood. The woman at the well. What was her name? I'll give you a $100 bill if you can tell me her name right now. Well, you can't tell me her name, which is good. I don't have $100. We don't know her name. She was always identified as the woman at the well. But here she came to the well, and she was performing what I would call a pretty mundane duty. Just drawing water out of a well. But when we read this story, we see that she came all alone. She came by herself. And there's a reason there. There's some significance there. Now, most people wouldn't have given this woman the time of day. But Jesus takes the initiative and engages in a conversation with this woman. And that conversation changed her life. Now, I told you a few weeks ago, in every message, I'm going to give you a takeaway. I'm calling it a takeaway. That may be a made-up name, okay, but I like it. I want you to take it away with you today. It's a truth, it's a nugget of truth that I want you to be able to carry with you once you leave here today. The takeaway is this. Fess up to your mess up, and Jesus can clean up the mess up. How do you get out of a mess? How do you get out of a mess? I've been there. Obviously, you all have been there. And over the years in ministry and dealing with people, there's been a lot of people that would say, I've just messed up. We've all done that. That's part of the human nature. We've all messed up. But how do we get out of that? What are the steps? And I got to tell you, I could very, very easily preach an hour and a half on this passage today. And if I had given you a warning and you could have brought a sack lunch, we could have done. There's a whole lot of stuff I could cover today. I just don't have time. So I'm just trying to draw out some of the high points here, okay? First of all, we see here the Lord waiting to meet this woman at the well. Now that is significant because the Lord is waiting for us. He's waiting to meet with us. He wants to have a conversation with us. Maybe it's in the quietness of our own home. Maybe it's on a retreat. But the Lord wants the opportunity of meeting with us and talking with us, just like he did this woman. And he had come to pass, meaning Jesus, had come to pass through Samaria. Now that's significant, okay? So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, weary from all of his travels and his journey, was sitting beside the well. And it was about the 6th hour. Now, the 6th hour, is that 6 o'clock in the morning? Not on the Jewish watch. Okay? That is high noon. 12 noon. Because for them, it started there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And the 6th hour would be 6 hours later, which is 12 noon. I think it's important that we note where this is taking place. It was at Jacob's well. Not just any well, but it was Jacob's well. And Jacob's well, as we read, was in a field. It was in a field that Jacob had purchased long, long ago, so that he would have a place to pitch his tent there in the land of Canaan. As far as I can tell, this is the first piece of real estate that any Jew owned in the promised land that is recorded in his word. So Jesus was traveling from Judea, heading up to Galilee. Now, between these two regions is a territory called Samaria. And even though it was the shortest path from Judea to Galilee, Jews never went through Samaria. Now, there's a lot of information about why that's the case, and I don't have the time this morning to share that with you, but we could go back 700 years before to the Assyrian Empire and get an explanation for that. But the Samaritans were those that lived on the other side of the tracks. They were living in what the Jewish people referred to as no man's land. Samaria, the people of Samaria was viewed as gross people. They were even lower than the Gentiles. A decent Jew wouldn't be found dead in Samaria. But we see Jesus going through there. And verse 6 tells us that it was the 6th hour, high noon. Here's a woman, not with a group of people or a group of other ladies. She was all by herself, and she was drawing water. It might bring more light to your understanding if you realize that Middle Eastern village women would always avoid the heat of the day. They would go early in the morning, or they would go and draw that water just before sundown. But they were always in a group. They were never alone. And here this woman comes at the worst time of the day, high noon. Now, what we do know about her, apparently, she was a bad girl. Somewhere, she messed up. And Jesus was wanting to meet her. Jesus was wanting a one-on-one conversation with her. And then we noticed that there's this unspeakable request. He speaks to her, and remember, men, even particularly Jewish men, wouldn't be speaking to a Samaritan woman, let alone a stranger. And I see what Jesus is doing right here is he's breaking that sexual barrier between man and woman, talking and communicating. But he's also breaking down that racial barrier between the Jews and the Samaritans. And then in verse 9, when he asks, "Give me a drink," she says, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask me for a drink? A Samaritan." Now this woman had some baggage, okay? She had some baggage. But Jesus knew about her. Jesus knew everything about her. Guess what? She wasn't the only thing he knows everything about. The Lord knows everything about us, about you, about me, about everyone else. And yet he's still willing to meet with her. Just like he knows everything about us. He sees our need for meeting with him and seeing what he has to offer to bring about life and to bring about an abundance of life. And then not only is he willing to meet her, but it looks like to me he's willing to accept her. Now, verse 7 there, we see an unbelievable request here. He's asking for a drink from a woman, a Samaritan woman. Now, that's an unlikely, unbelievable request. He's asking for a drink from her unclean, sin-contaminated water jug. Didn't make sense. Now, as I step back and I look at this and try to visualize what's going on here, in all probability, this is the first time that Samaritan woman had ever had a man to look upon her in love and respect and not out of lust. So I try to put myself in the mindset of what this Samaritan woman was going through. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would not have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and this well is deep. How do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. And Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will offer will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Wow. I'm beginning to think. This woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Now she's beginning to realize that she's probably thirstier than she ever realized she was. And then in verses 16 through 18, we see something else that I really believe opens the door here. And Jesus said to her, go call your husband. I'll get him on the phone, okay? Tell him to come here, okay? Send him an email. Tell him to come over here. And the woman said, I don't have a husband. And Jesus said to her, you're right. You're right in saying you have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you now are with is not your husband. What you have said is true. And the woman said to him, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshiped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. And Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do, not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Okay, now let's try to soak in as much of this as we can. Now we may be getting the picture as to why this woman comes to the well all alone and by herself. 5 times she was with a husband. 5 times. I'm not sure I'd want to marry her. I'd be afraid I'd be written off. I'd be the 6th one. Would you want to marry somebody that's been married 5 times? And we don't know whether they died or what happened to them. We don't know the rest of the story there. Some critics might even say that she was a cross between Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, and Elizabeth Taylor. There's a lot going on right there in this woman's life. And what we might say is, she was messed up. It's almost like a fly caught in a spider web. You can't get out. Nowhere to go. I believe Jesus is saying in verses 19 and 20 something that should never been told. No matter what you've done, no matter who you are, no matter how bad you have been, no matter how much you've messed up, you can worship God if you do it in spirit and in truth. The hour is coming and no one here when the true worship will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. See, Jesus is saying, I know everything about you. I know what you've done. I know how you've messed up. And I still care for you. I still want to have a relationship with you. I want to make a difference. And then that leads us to the third point. The Lord wants to change us. And we may already have been changed. We may have been far withdrawn from where that woman at the well is. Somewhere in our lives, we've been changed. You might be here today and you haven't come to that point. In verses 25 and 26, we see Jesus saying, I who speak to you am he. Now in Greek, it says, the one who is speaking to you is I. Now in the Old Testament, remember, I am is what God called himself in the Old Testament. You know, I think about this. I think about this woman at the well. I think about her life. I think about her life in comparison to in comparison to us, not we, in comparison to us and our lives. Our life is an open book to the Lord. Our heart is an open window to the Lord. What we try to hide, what we try to conceal, he knows, he understands that. The skeletons in anybody's closet, like pictures hanging on his wall. And he sees that person, he points it, I want to give you abundant life. I want to give you the living water. He looked at this skeleton and said, I can change this. I can make a difference. See, he's willing to accept us. That's the message, or at least part of the message that he's telling this woman. This woman was a total mess up. But she comes to the point where she is changed. She left her water jug there in verses 28 through 30. She left her water jug and she went into town. She says, come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? Can this be the Messiah? She left her water jug. But she had her heart quenched of the thirst spiritually. She had been looking for temporary happiness, the biggest part of her life, it seems like to me. But Jesus was able to give her permanent joy. He had replaced her guilt with his grace. She had replaced her mix-up or mess-up with his cleanup. You see, this woman had been used so many times by men for their pleasure. And now she's going out testifying what he has done in verses 28 and 29. And now she's being used for God's glory. I think what must have been going on as she was telling the good news of what was happening. There were people there looking and seeing and thinking to themselves, you know, now if Jesus accepted her, maybe Jesus can accept me. And if Jesus can clean up her mess up, maybe he can do the same thing with me. See, one thing that we need to clean up a mess is water. And we have a choice. Every one of us have a choice right now, or have had choices that we've had to choose from, and will have choices. The two choices are, we can mess up. We can continue on. We can continue drinking from the world's water, never having that satisfaction, always being thirsty, always wanting more of the wrong stuff. We can have our hearts dehydrated by the world's water. Or we can drink from the living water. And Jesus promises to never thirst again. Fess up with our mess up. Confess to God. He already knows. But when we fess up in honest confession with him, he can clean up in a way that nobody else can. You see, there's a world of people out there longing to be cleaned up, just like this woman at the well. There's a world of people out there looking for water that will quench their thirst. But it's the world's water. It's not the living water. And only the living water that Jesus Christ can only provide will quench that thirst. Let's pray.